All right, welcome to Mrs. Philippak's Honors 8th Grade Math. You should have out your sheet that you're going to take all the notes on. This is typed, and then you'll have to fill in the answers. Just a quick tidbit here. Tomorrow in class, we will be doing page 62. 5 through 45, every other odd, which is like 5, 9, 13, and you should not have to use a calculator. So if you're feeling ambitious tonight, you can get a start on that. Also, the vocab is due on Friday. So we will start with some definitions. Variable is a letter or symbol used to represent a value that can change. That's X, Y, Z, A, anything like that. A constant is a value that does not change. So if you had like 5X, 5 is the constant, the number in front of X. Numeral expression is a group of math symbols containing only constants and operations. So that means there's no variable. So like 5 plus 3, that'd be a numeral expression. An algebraic expression is the same thing as a numeral expression, but now you have a variable, a letter, something like 5x plus 3. And evaluate means to solve. So you'd have to have an equal sign. So if you had 5x plus 3 equals 7, you would subtract the 3. So 5x equals 4. And then you would divide by 5. So x is 4/5. Now in the book, sometimes the answer key is a decimal, like 0.8. It's going to be way better this year if you get used to keeping things in fraction form and not converting to decimal, because when we simplify later, you're going to need the fractions. So always leave your answers in simplest fraction form. Excellent. All right, the next slide on your page is a couple problems. So what I would like you to do is try letter A and pause it right now. And then as soon as you're done, hit play and see if you did the same thing I did. So pause. All right, Z is 3, Y is 8, 8 plus 3 is 11. And that's our answer. Same thing here. Go ahead and hit pause. Try B right now. As soon as you're done, hit play. So Y is 8, X is 4. When you divide those out, you get 2. And the last time, go ahead and hit pause. Try letter C. Now that you're done, 2 letters next to each other means multiply. So 4 times 3 is 12. All right, some more definitions. I'm actually going to have you add to this sheet because you need to. So, positive number is a number greater than 0, like 1, 2, 3, 4. Negative number is less than 0, like -1, -2, -3, -4. Absolute value is a measure of distance, so everything becomes positive. The absolute value of -5 is 5. The absolute value of 7 is still 7 because it's 7 away from the origin. If you had something like -12x, that's a distance of 12x from the origin. So everything, the origin is 0. On a coordinate grid, the point 0, 0, right in the middle. Just thought about that word. And so if you have something like 15AB, absolute value, that's an absolute value sign, then your answer is 15AB. So everything is always positive. So the opposite would be like 5 and negative 5. Those are opposites, and they add up to give you 0. Additive inverse is the same exact thing as opposites. You could use letters. So if you had 5x, the additive inverse would be negative 5x. And real numbers is anything on a number line, including irrational numbers. So let's add a couple definitions here. We'll start with irrational numbers. An irrational number is a decimal that never stops, that never repeats. I'll go ahead and write that. Pi is an irrational number. Also, the square root of 2, the square root of 3, the square root of any prime number is an irrational number because it'll fill your calculator up. It'll never repeat in a pattern. And it will never stop, also called terminate. So a rational number is everything else. So that is a decimal that stops, 3.145. That is a decimal that repeats, 3.12, repeating. That is like if you had 3.1672673647891. There are a bunch of 7s, but it doesn't repeat in a pattern. So this terminates. It stops. So that's how we know it's rational. It's also all the other numbers, 0, 20, negative 3, fractions, 4/5. 3 more. Natural numbers are the numbers 1, 2, 3, and everything above it. Whole numbers include 0 and all positive whole numbers or natural numbers. And integers are all the positive and all the negative whole numbers. All right, when you are adding real numbers, if it's the same sign, you just keep that same sign in front of the numbers. So 2 negatives add to give you a bigger negative. If it's a different sign, I always make it plus a negative. And then what you're going to do is subtract the smaller absolute value from the larger absolute value. So that would be your answer, and then you would keep the sign from the larger one. So if you have like negative 10 plus 3, we know it's negative. You could think of the absolute value of negative 10 being 10, the absolute value of 3 being 3, and when you subtract those, you get 7, and we know it's negative. If this doesn't make sense to you and you always get the correct sign when you're doing the math problems, don't worry. If you get incorrect signs, it might be helpful. So when you're subtracting, that's when you make it plus a negative. So 7 minus 3, I would make that plus negative. And that would be 4. Okay, so we're going to do the same thing. These are a little harder because there's fractions. And a quick reminder, when you're adding and subtracting fractions, you do have to have a common denominator. So go ahead and hit pause and try letter A. Okay, I find it easiest if you make these improper fractions. So 4 times 5, I'm multiplying these two, is 20, plus 2 is 22. So I have negative 22 over 5. And then 3 times 2 is 6, plus 2 is 8. So I have 8 over 3. Now you need the least common multiple. So 3 and 5, I'm going to multiply this side by 3. I'm going to multiply this side by 5. So now I have negative 66 over 15. And over here I have 40 over 15. So negative 66 plus 40 would be negative 26 over 15. And if you divide 15 into 26, you get 1, and you have 11 left over. So 1 and 11 over 15. Negative, because that was a negative. So the whole thing is a negative because the bigger number is a negative. Okay, problem B. And again, you should be able to do these without a calculator. So go ahead and hit pause and try that. All right, I would make that plus a negative. So we have a negative 1.5 plus negative 3, and that's just negative 4.5. You don't have to make any common denominator. You just put the negatives together, and it's a bigger negative. And the last one, go ahead and hit pause and try it. Anytime you have minus and negative, it's called the slash and dash method. You make it plus, and you change the sign of the thing behind it. So it's really plus a positive. So negative 2.25 plus 5 and 1/8. I'm going to do this one a little different than letter A. You can totally do that. But if you have 5 and 1/8 minus 2 and 1/4, 5 minus 2 is 3. And this would need to be a common denominator as the 8. So I would multiply it by 2. So I have a 1/8, and I'm subtracting a 2/8. So I get a negative 1/8. So this is kind of, this is kind of like 3 minus 1/8. So I could rewrite 3 as 2 and 8/8. That's the same thing. So 8/8 minus 1/8, because 8/8 is 1, is 2 and 7/8. Just a different way to go about it. If you like letter A's method, continue with that. Okay, more vocabulary. Reciprocals are two numbers with the product of 1. So like 1/2 has a reciprocal of 2 over 1. 7/12 has a reciprocal of 12 over 7. And if I multiply those, I get 1. Both of them. And whenever you multiply, you want to cancel. It's like a big fraction, anything on top with anything on the bottom. So the reason we get 1 is because everything cancels. And you can't have 0 because 0 changes everything. But I could have like 1 times these and nothing changes. Okay, the multiplicative inverse is the exact same thing as reciprocals. It just is the same exact thing. And the 0 property is 0 times anything is 0. So 5 times 0 is 0. If you have 0 divided by a number, so like 0 divided by 10, you get 0. Your answer is 0. If you have 10 divided by 0, if you put that in your calculator, it says error. 0 doesn't go into anything. Like 0 times nothing gives you 10. So that's why it's undefined. This doesn't exist. It is nothing. It's nowhere. This is the number 0. 0 divided by 10, 10 times what is 0? That's 0. The other thing, undefined. Absolute value. I'm going to give you a couple problems for the absolute value up here. We already talked about it a little bit, but it's right here. So negative 73. What's the absolute value of that? 73. Negative 5az. What's the absolute value of that? 5az. 37. What's the absolute value of that? 37. All right, so when you're multiplying and dividing, if it's all positive, it's positive. If it's all negative, it's positive, because a negative times a negative is a positive. And if it's one positive and one negative, then it's negative, because a negative times a positive is a negative. So, negative 60 divided by 15, what do you think that is? It's negative 4. This time, try letter B. When you multiply two negatives, two numbers next to each other means multiply, you get a positive, so that should be positive 36. And go ahead and try letter C. Again, it might be helpful to make this an improper fraction. So 8 times 2 is 16, plus 5 is 21. So now we have negative 7/16 divided by 21/8. Now, dividing a fraction, you can think of that as negative 7/16 divided by 21/8. That is beast. Whenever you have a division of a fraction, you multiply by the reciprocal. You can even just rewrite this as negative 7/16 times 8 over 21. Now this is lovely because you can make a big fraction and anything on top cancels with anything on the bottom. So 7 and 21 would be 1 and 3. And 8 and 16 would be 1 and 2. So our answer is negative 1 over 2 times 3, which is 6. If you look at this one, everything in the bottom cancels, which is why we do that. And then you do this exactly like we just did it. Okay, the power is in the exponent. There's a number. There could be something like 4 to the x. That's a little bit different when the x is in a power. If you have a problem like 4 to the x equals 16, 4 to what power equals 16? Well, 4 times 4 is 16. So that x would be 2. We'll get more into that a little bit later in the year, but we'll do some without x's right now. So the exponent is the number up here in the air. That's your exponent. The base is the base number. 3 squared means 3 times 3, so that's the number that repeats. Squared means it's raised to the second power. Cubed means it's raised to the third power. So go ahead and try letter A. Hit pause. 9 times 9 is 81. Go ahead and try letter B. This time the negative is in the parentheses, so it's negative 4 times negative 4 times negative 4. 4 times 4 is 16, times another 4 is 64. Since there's 3 negatives, it's a negative. An odd number of negatives means it's a negative. Go ahead and try C. This time the negative's out front, so that's negative. And then there are 4 5s. 5 times 5 is 25, times another 5 is 125, times another 25 is 625. So negative 625 should be your answer. If you got positive, it would only be positive if it was like that. because then there's 4 negatives. But this is definitely negative because the negative is out front. It's not to the 4th power. All right, so try D. Negative 3 times negative 3, positive 9. And the last one, 0 to any power is 0. And our last slide of the day. If you square root something, it's what number times itself gives you that number. So the square root of 9 is 3. Hopefully you're familiar with the main square roots. We've got the square root of 1 being 1, the square root of 4 being 2. You'd have to know your perfect squares. The square root of 9 being 3. Square root of 16 is 4. Square root of 25 is 5. Square root of 36 is 6. Square root of 49 is 7. Square root of 64 is 8. Square root of 81 is 9. Square root of 100 is 10. Square root of 121, 11. Square root of 144, 12. One more. Square root of 169, 13. Hopefully you know up to that, because like you would just square these numbers. 13 times 13 is 169. All right. Every time you take the square root, you do get a positive and a negative. So I should put a plus and a minus on every single one of these, because negative 3 times negative 3 is 9, and positive 3 times positive 3 is also 9. And this symbol is positive or negative. Positive and negative. Both of them are your answer. Okay. If there's a negative out front, the whole thing is negative. If there's a positive out front, the whole thing is positive. So the square root of 1, what do you think it is? 1. You could actually put plus or minus 1 here, since there's nothing out front. Negative 64, negative 8. Has to be negative because of the negative out front. 0 is just 0. 0 doesn't need a positive or a negative. This one has a positive or negative out front, so you need to make sure you put them both. Again, you're welcome to put positive or negative 5. That's fine. And when it's like this, it is still positive or negative. They do both exist. It's just this one where it doesn't, or if it looks like this. And then with a negative under the square root, it's always undefined. There's no number times itself that gives you a negative, so that negative underneath the square root makes it undefined. All right, hopefully this was a good walk down memory road. I will see you in the morning.